What's up, YouTube? I made this video to share my Injured Bulwark Druid build. I'm going to go over my skills, Paragon, and gear, as well as discuss a variety of other concepts that are relevant to the build. This build functions by using Earthen Bulwark as its main offensive and defensive skill. By using a Storm skill in combination with the symbiotic aspect on our necklace, we're able to spam our Earthen Bulwark every few seconds. The reason I play below 35% health is because damage reduction while injured is extremely powerful in Season 1. This is because almost every other defensive affix was nerfed, while for some reason damage reduction while injured was untouched. It can roll on pants, boots, and amulet and maxes out at 81.7% damage reduction. The defense bonus affects your Earthen Bulwark barriers, giving them a massive boost to their effective health. While this build typically uses the unique Great Stuff of the Crone, it's totally viable without any uniques, so I will be linking a second build planner below the like button with a non-unique setup. Now I'm going to go over my skill build. Claw is great because the enhancements give us bonus attack speed and then a chance to attack twice. All these extra attacks are just more chances to proc the symbiotic aspect on our necklace, and more Earthen Bulwarks. More Earthen Bulwarks means more damage and more damage reduction. By using the Great Stuff of the Crone, we also get the benefit of the Storm Strike, so we invest here as well. We take innate Earthen Bulwark down here. This is where the majority of our damage comes from. Cyclone Armor is mainly just for the passive damage reduction. However, if you get in a bind, you can use the active to push enemies away. Poison Creeper is a no-brainer for the extra 20% critical strike chance, and the cooldown's constantly being reset by our Pack Leader Spirit Boon. It's also useful for stacking up our Disobedience aspect for more armor. Hurricane's nice because it gives us damage reduction, and it can also help us to proc the symbiotic aspect on our necklace. Petrify is very useful to take out elites and bosses thanks to the stun and the massive crit damage multiplier. Nature's Fury in combination with the symbiotic aspect is what enables this whole build. I think the Spirit Boons are pretty straightforward. For the Deer, we take the damage reduction from elites. For the Eagle, we take 10% attack speed. For the Wolf, we take Pack Leader. This resets the cooldown of our Poison Creeper. And then Bolster for extra Fortify. And then on the Snake, we take Calm Before the Storm to reset our Petrify. If you're not playing a low life variant, you can take this, Masochistic, but obviously we don't want the heal if we want to stay below 35% health. Now I'm going to go through my Paragon boards. On the starting board, we socket Territorial for the damage reduction to close, and we just pick up these minimum dex nodes required to activate the bonus. On the Inner Beast board, we socket Shapeshifter to increase the armor from the Determination node from 200 to 450. Then we path through Tenacity for more armor, and pick up the Havoc cluster for lots of crit damage. On the Heightened Malice board, we socket Earth and Sky, primarily to pump up all these magic nodes that we invest into. These give us damage reduction from poisoned and damage to poisoned enemies. By activating the glyph bonus, we get an extra multiplier to vulnerable enemies. We then come up here and take the legendary node Heightened Malice for the massive multiplier it gives us. On the Lust for Carnage board, we socket Undaunted, and activate a few nodes just to activate the damage reduction while fortified bonus. Then we path down here through all this attack speed to Wild's Call because attack speed is extremely important for this build, as I'll go into later. On the Earthen Devastation board, we socket Fang and Claw for the extra multiplier and to beef up these crit nodes within the glyph's radius. We pick up Earthen Devastation for the big multiplier since we have tons of crowd control, and then we come up here to the Crushing Earth cluster and pick up these nodes for more critical strike damage. On the Thunderstruck board, we socket Exploit for extra vulnerable damage. This build is very low on vulnerable damage, so any extra you can get will go a long way. We path down to Deluge afterwards for more critical strike damage. Now I'm going to go over the legendary aspects that I use for this build. The most important aspect is the symbiotic aspect on your necklace. The most important offensive aspect is the rapid aspect, because the faster you attack, the more Earthen Bulwark resets you get. For my other offensive powers, I'm running Natural Balance and Crash Stone for more critical strike damage. For my defensive powers, I'm running Disobedience, Might, and Mending Stone. The Mending Stone is mainly for quality of life. You can actually get a little more damage reduction by running Vigorous for your third slot, but the extra 6 seconds of Earthen Bulwark is really nice, especially when you're running between packs. I love the Ghostwalker aspect on the boots because we're almost always unstoppable with this build, so we just get that 25% move speed and phasing all the time. Finally, we use Great Staff of the Crone as our weapon. However, if you haven't found this unique, you can just put an Aspect of Nature's Savagery on a one-hander, and then put another offensive power of your choice on the other one-hander. Another aspect you're going to want to look out for is the Skinwalker's aspect. You can use this to heal yourself up if you take too much damage without actually having to use a potion. Next, I'm going to talk about stat priority on gear. Damage reduction while injured is currently the strongest damage reduction stat in the game except for armor, which requires much more investment. To get the most out of this build, I recommend you get your damage reduction while injured up to at least 75%, but getting up to 80% would be much better. The second most important stat for this build is barrier regeneration, or barrier bonus. You want a minimum of around 60% to maximize the effective health of your barriers. While more will not increase their effective health, it will continue to scale your damage multiplicatively. This stat is extremely high priority up to 60%, at which point it becomes similar in priority to vulnerable damage, so still pretty high. Attack speed is very strong on this build because the faster you attack, the more cooldown resets you get on your Earthen Bulwark. The more Earthen Bulwarks you cast, the more damage you deal, and the more damage you can tank. Armor is super important in this game. You can and should get your armor high enough to get 85% damage reduction for monsters in tier 100 dungeons. I released a video a couple of weeks ago explaining in depth why armor is so powerful and how to go about maximizing your defense in this game, so I'll be linking that down in the description if you'd like to check that out after this video. I think you need about 12 to 13k armor for 85% damage reduction in a tier 100, so I think this is a pretty good amount to shoot for with full buffs and disobedience stacks. Vulnerable damage is extremely powerful in this build because we get so little of it from our gear and our Paragon. In fact, for my character, vulnerable damage is about 5 times as strong as critical strike damage. Because of this, you're going to want to get high or max rolls for vulnerable damage on your gear. Our critical strike damage bucket is huge, and if we don't crit, then we don't get any value from this bucket. So we want our critical strike chance to be as high as possible so we're always getting this multiplier. Critical strike damage is still nice for this build, but we have so much of it, adding more just isn't super impactful, and if you could instead pick up more vulnerable damage or more barrier generation, definitely do that instead, and you'll see a much larger increase in your damage. The last stat I want to talk about is cooldown reduction. While it still feels nice and increases the amount of Earthen Bulwarks you can cast per minute, it doesn't do as good of a job at this as attack speed. If you can get both, then great, more Earthen Bulwarks is better, but if you have to choose between cooldown reduction and attack speed, definitely go for attack speed. Now I'm going to go over the best in slot affixes for each piece of gear. For helm you want basic skill attack speed, barrier generation, total armor, and CDR. For chest you want armor, DR to close, DR while fortified, and DR from poisoned. On gloves you want attack speed, crit chance, crit damage, and willpower. On pants you want DR while injured, armor, DR to close, and DR while fortified. On boots you want DR while injured, movement speed, armor and werewolf, and willpower. On amulet you want DR while injured, armor and werewolf, CDR, and movement speed. And then on your rings you want barrier generation, vulnerable damage, crit strike chance, and critical strike damage. Next I'm going to talk about gems and elixirs. Since barrier generation is a huge multiplier for us, I recommend gemming your armor with diamonds. If you're pushing tough content and you're not having damage issues, you can switch the diamonds for sapphires for extra damage reduction while fortified. If your armor is below 12,000 with full buffs and disobedience stacks, I recommend using Iron Skin Elixir to push tier 100 dungeons. For most other cases, you're going to be better off using the Heady Assault Elixir because the 20% attack speed is huge both offensively and defensively. The 3 malignant hearts you're going to want to use are Revenge, Tempting Fate, and the Barber. We use the Caged Heart of Revenge because 20% damage suppression is huge. We don't really care about the explosion damage, so focus on trying to get as high of a roll on the damage suppression and armor as you can get. We use the Caged Heart of Tempting Fate because it gives us a bunch of extra crit damage. The reduced damage when not critting isn't super impactful since most of our damage comes from the Barber and the damage from the Barber always crits. The addition of the Caged Heart of the Barber is the biggest buff that this build got in Season 1. Thanks to this heart, this build is able to one-shot elite packs and even bosses in tier 100 dungeons. The duration maxes out at 4 seconds, and you want to get this duration as long as possible on the heart that you equip. A monster will explode if they're affected by the barber, and you deal 100% of their health as damage to them. In large packs, this creates a chain explosion that can build up massive damage to elites or bosses caught in the middle of it. The barber can also be very annoying to play with in groups for some builds that rely on lucky hit, such as tornado druids or twisting blade rogues, because they can't get those lucky hit procs while the monster is immune due to the barber. So this build might not be the best choice if you often play with friends that run these specs. I have one final word of caution for anyone who'd like to try this build, and that's that the damage of Earthen Bulwark seems to scale with monster health and level for some reason. Nothing in the tooltip alludes to this interaction, so I doubt that it was intended by the developers. The skill has worked this way since the preseason, so jury's out as to when or if this will be changed in the future.